Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm just going to keep admitting everyone into the room. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a very special discussion of Gary Nunn's debut book, The Psychics Test. It's an investigation into the wild, widespread, and surprisingly powerful world of psychics and clairvoyance. And as it says on the back of this very fabulous book, strap yourself in, things are about to get weird. Before we jump into things, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which I'm currently on, in Meanjin, which is the Yuggera and Turrbal people, as well as the traditional owners of the land in which you're all joining us from on Zoom tonight from all over the country. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Some general housekeeping for the audience. You will be muted for the session, but if you have any questions for me, please type them into the chat and I'll get onto them. You're also welcome to leave your video on if you would like. And just make sure you are set to speaker view. So up in the corner, just hit where it says view, go to speaker view, and then that way you'll be able to see Gary and Benjamin in full screen. So once I wrap up here, I will also just send through a link of where you can purchase your copy of the Psychics Test, and I'll pop that into the chat box, and that will show you how to use the chat function, which will be very important for our Q&A session towards the end. So at around 7:15 or 7:20, we will move to a Q&A session, but please feel free to type in your questions throughout as they pop into your head, because it's the worst when you think of a question and then later you forget it. So just once you've got it, feel free to type it in. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I'd love to introduce you to Benjamin Law, who will be taking things from here. Benjamin is an Australian writer, broadcaster, and sadly an ex-Queenslander who's based in Sydney. He's the author of The Family Law, Geisha, Adventures in the Queer East, the quarterly essay Moral Panic 101, and the editor of Growing Up Queer in Australia in 2019. Every week, Benjamin co-hosts ABC Radio National's weekly national pop culture show, Stop Everything, and interviews public figures for Good Weekend. Over to you, Benjamin.
Thanks so much, Yana, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight, everyone. It's a shame that we can't see each other in person, but it's so great that we've all gathered here online. I'm really stoked to be joining you here from Gadigal land, part of the Great Eora Nation. And of course, First Nations people have been sharing stories and knowledge here for tens of thousands of years. Together, they constitute the oldest continuing civilization the planet's ever seen. And I'm also very grateful to elders past and present that we can continue sharing stories and knowledge here on what is and what will always be Aboriginal land. At the same time, we're also living in a time of great uncertainty. You might have noticed around us, maybe those of you in Brisbane, a bit more relaxed, but those of us who are in lockdown parts of the country feel a great time of uncertainty, but I know you're feeling it too, because yes, there's coronavirus, there's climate collapse, economic, political catastrophe, and as of yesterday, earthquakes in parts of the country as well. So we are obviously yearning and looking for solace and guidance wherever we can get it, a sense of safety and a sense of communion. More and more, there is that growing sense that the future is uncertain, and what we do know about the future just feels and looks pretty grim. And so I don't think it's a surprise that a lot of us are going old school into the world of mediums and horoscopes, clairvoyant, psychics. I know for myself as a millennial, I'm not the only millennial who's doing this. I'm getting back into horoscopes in a really big way. I think I'm a science-minded person, very much a science person. But at the same time, I do have the CoStar app on my thing. I read the Cuts horoscopes every week. I can't tell you what a Virgo is versus what a Sagittarius is, but for some reason, I still get great comfort from the Cuts horoscopes. And so millennials are getting into it with gusto, but I think a lot of people across generations are as well. So what does this mean? Who, if anyone, can be relied on in this realm? And once you start digging into this world, what do you find? This is such a great book that guides us through that world. The Psychic Test, an adventure in the world of believers and skeptics. I have been inhaling this book all week. And as much as it's this great work of investigative journalism, it's incredibly tender, humane, and poignant work as well that really, really is open to not just the world of psychics themselves, but also interrogates and reveals what draws us to this world. Its author is an award-winning journalist who's worked across the US, the UK, and Australia. He's editor-at-large for the Sydney Sentinel. He's the former features journalist for the BBC Australian edition and has contributed to The Guardian, ABC, Sydney Morning Herald, and Australian Women's Weekly. He's worked for a decade in the non-profit sector. He's won a place on the Walkley's Our Watch Fellowship. He was a finalist for Journalist of the Year at the ACON Honour Awards and winner of the Faith Award. Rosie Waterland describes him as the next John Ronson. And I think after you read this book, you may agree with her. Gary Nunn, welcome and congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Ben. You're too kind. Good to be here and great to be here with you because I've fangirled you for a long time.
Oh, we're friends. We've hung out. We've had beers together. Hey, look, I just want to ask the obvious question. Why psychics and why now? What hooked you into this world and what made you want to write about them?
Good question. First of all, it was my sister. My sister's always been really into psychics and I used to poke fun at her about it and mock her. And she dragged me along to see a couple. And I think that's when I first realized that it was a really intoxicating experience to sit opposite a psychic who strokes your ego, talks to you all about your future, your romantic future, your professional future. And that's very seductive and very powerful. So she kind of was the first person, albeit I remained a complete skeptic and still took the piss out of my sister. But in the book, my sister represents the voice of the believer and I represent the voice of the skeptic at the start. That's how we start. So what I will do is we step into each other's worlds a bit in the book for those who haven't read it. I don't want to give too many spoilers. But yeah, she kind of got me into it. And I thought, it'd be really interesting to write a book that talks to both believer and skeptic and kind of bursts us out of those filter bubbles a little bit. Because all the books so far on this subject have either spoke to one or the other, and usually believer, because then books sell better. And I thought, I want to speak to both. But at the same time, I think why now? I wanted to write a book that was on a topic that hadn't been sort of done to death and no one was really talking about, and start with the micro and go into the macro and explore this wider world. But also, I think we're living, well, when I started the book, COVID hadn't happened yet. So I can't really kind of like retrofit this reason, but I guess I can tell you why it feels prescient now, which is we're living in a time when misinformation and pseudoscience is not only distracting, it's dangerous and it's even deadly. And I wanted to explore why people indulge pseudoscience, why they believe in it, and to try and discourage us from being scared of those people and just mocking them like I did my sister and demonizing them, and actually, dare I say it, listen to them, see where they're coming from and see what it would take to encourage them towards science and encourage them towards rationality, and why there's this split between believer and skeptic, and sort of like tease out the nuance.
Your sister, as you say, represents the believer, and you come in with a healthy dose of skepticism, I think. And I think it's really interesting and lovely the way that you framed the book with family, actually, because as much as your sister is a character and a presence is felt in the book, you dedicate the book to two family members, one of whom is your father. And that's actually kind of where the story begins in a way, when you encounter a psychic called Melanie, who believes she can summon your dad. And this might be a really good opportunity to hear from you on the book itself. Can you give us a bit of context in terms of what you're about to read for us?
I can. So on the journey, I went a bit gonzo and I saw dozens of mediums, astrologers, tarot readers, psychics, medical intuitives, etc., both in London and in Sydney. Melanie just fell into my path. So I was going along to this gay networking event called Fruits in Suits.
Familiar with it.
And she happened to be on the bill. So like it's kind of like a bit of synchronicity really. And I thought, well, I've got to go. I'm running a book on this stuff. And so I was kind of surprised to see her there because it was a professional networking group and it's normally quite dry. And as often the case, whenever you go and see a psychic, it kind of brings this kind of sense of like mystery and possibility to any proceeding. So if you're able to suspend your disbelief and just indulge it a little bit, like wondrous things can happen. And that's where it all starts.
Take it away, Gary. Let's hear from the book itself. This is from the prologue.
It is. Okay. My recording of the psychic's reading is just 5 minutes and 47 seconds long. But my God, it was memorable. I was at a Fruits in Suits, a professional networking group event for gay men. I'd been surprised when I saw the program. It had never before included a visiting psychic, and I deliberately booked the night because she'd be there. She's one of the few psychic mediums whose full name I always remember, Melanie Obeid. Walking in, I felt itchy hot in my suit. It was December 2019, the beginning of Australia's summer, and I spotted Melanie instantly. She sat at the back with a fruit in a suit leaning right into her, thoroughly engrossed, lapping up every word he was. This is often the case for people who go to psychic readings, even sceptics. Whenever anyone, sits opposite you, talking to you, just about you, it's incredibly seductive, to the point of being intoxicating, which makes the experience very powerful. The people seeking Melanie's counsel weren't, by any stretch, those you might usually expect to consult psychics. They were suited, booted, and standing alongside their colleagues, competitors, or respected peers. They were managers, CEOs, team leaders, people in positions of authority and influence. That's the type these Fruits in Suits events attract. I am not that type. I usually go there to find a potential future husband and almost always come away disappointed, bored, or both. This was a Fruits in Suits event where I did not leave bored, thanks to Melanie. In that 5 minutes and 47 seconds, I cycled through more human emotions than I had all week. Melanie's young. She's got a funky, choppy blonde cut. She's got the most bewitching green eyes I've ever seen. They look more like a rock of raw opal than an eye colour. The minute I sit on the bar stool at the table opposite her and she starts talking, I'm transfixed. I am mining that opal. A few seemingly random names come through and I just look baffled. Then Melanie asks me if my parents are still together or separated. Divorced, I say. Is Dad here or has he passed? He's dead, I say. Well, Dad's saying, what the hell's going on here? I don't know if he was into this kind of thing, but he's very dubious. He's saying, what the hell are you doing? I sometimes wondered the same thing. I retort that my dad, who died 4 years ago, probably thought that a lot about my sometimes flamboyant life. We both laugh. She gets my humour. I'm enjoying this. Suddenly, those piercing green eyes widen. They become almost, I don't know what word to use other than possessed. They hold my gaze and seem to stare into my very soul. Behind us is the buzz of the event at the bar at Sydney's Gay Village on Oxford Street. People are chatting, laughing, ordering drinks. It doesn't matter. Me and Melanie feel like the only two people in the room, nay, the world. The noise fades, and just like the engrossed fruit in a suit, my posture alters. My back is now arched forwards. My arms are millimeters from hers. I'm leaning right in. I don't even blink. Neither does she. My pulse accelerates. Beads of sweat start forming across my hairline. It's well intense. Melanie's green eyes continue to burn into me. Your dad wants to say this to you. He's very, very sorry that he couldn't be more there for you. I think about what happened when my mum and dad divorced when I was 15 and my sister 13. How we lived with Dad. How he continued to work full time, cook for us, give us lifts, do our washing, bring us up, put up with my princess strops. He was so there for me. until he wasn't. And in recent weeks, when his mum, my nan, died, how much I needed him, how I needed him to be there and help with her funeral, how I needed to grieve with him, and how he wasn't there. This all spins through very quickly through my mind. I try to remain poker-faced. He says he knows you'll roll your eyes, but he wants you to take this more seriously. He's extremely proud of the man you've become. Is that all right with you? She emphasizes extremely, as if the word itself is inadequate to convey the magnitude of pride. I nod silently. Proud. That word touches a nerve. It's triggered something in me. My mouth goes dry. I clam up. I feel myself getting hotter. I still don't blink. My eyes itch. You're going overseas next year. I nod silently. I return to my home country, Britain, annually from Australia. Dad's saying, well, business class, of course. God, if only I had that money, I quip. I want to bring this back to entertainment value. I want us to be laughing again. Dad's saying, we're recording this year. I nod. To make it up to you. Don't lose contact with my eyes. As if I could. They've all but hypnotized me. Apparently, this is Melanie's method, the way she does her readings, through the eyes. No kidding. To make it up to you, everything that he said or did, he's going to upgrade you to business class or first class next time. And it will prove, because you're very hard to please, it'll be your proof, she continues, that he's sorry. He's saying, I don't know how else to say sorry to you. And he's saying, I know you're cynical about it, but I'm very, very proud of you. It's those triggering words again. Sorry. Proud. Pride is the thing we all want to make our parents feel, isn't it? Above all other things. We know they love us. That's a given. It's automatic. But the proud bit, that's up to us. So my own psychic test is set by Melanie Abede with the transfixing, almost unnaturally green eyes. She set me a test reeking of privilege, whether I get upgraded to business or first class on my next trip home in 6 months, or even premium economy. I'll be generous here. Either would be a boon for this cattle class connoisseur. There's a pause. The noise of the bar slowly starts to return, and I suddenly feel myself blushing at the realization I'm in a room full of people. Then I realize Melanie is asking me a question I need to answer. She repeats it as I blink. My hearing blurs back in. I'm somewhat disorientated. What? I said, would you like a tissue? Only then, to my alarm and appalled horror, do I realise my face is sodden with tears that have fallen silently, surreptitiously, from my eyes as hers bewitched me. It's the first time any psychic has made me do this. It's why I remember Melanie's full name. I nod. I'm burning with embarrassment. Friends are sat behind me. A whole bar full of people, potential future husbands, networking. I don't believe that was my dad talking at all. I believe my dad is dead, and I don't believe in any afterlife whatsoever. That disbelief runs through me like the words engraved into a sweet stick of rock. It wasn't my dad, the one who championed me, raised me, instilled in me a healthy curiosity, but a healthier bullshit detector. It wasn't him. So why on earth was I crying?
Thank you so much, Gary, for that beautiful reading that shows us how personal and compelling these experiences are, even to someone like you, who is ostensibly a skeptic and science-brained coming into this realm. I also find it interesting that you encountered this psychic, Melanie, at Fruits in Suits, which is a gay business networking place. And even you were kind of like surprised that this is the kind of platform for her. And as I read your book, I became even more surprised at the realms in which psychics appear. There's a joke on the internet that says that the stock market is astrology for men. But then there's actual real intersections between astrologers, clairvoyants, tarot readers, psychics, mediums, with the world of serious commerce, with the law, with politics. Tell me about, in your research, the biggest surprises that you came across, like where psychics emerge that you didn't expect?
The biggest surprise is just how far up this goes, how high up this goes. World leaders, chief executives, and even police murder investigators. I initially thought it might be an outlier because I reported for the Sydney Morning Herald on the story of the biggest stockbroking firm collapse in Australia since the global financial crisis. Executive chairman, Glenn Rosewall, he hired a psychic and paid her for 4 years. And her name was Naveen Rottinger, and she advised him on where to invest his stocks and shares, but also who to hire and even who to fire, all based on her psychic advice. And for 4 years, paid. And I discovered this when the firm went collapse. And as I say, biggest stockbroking firm bust since the global financial crisis. And he was put on the dock for corporate mismanagement, and Naveen, the psychic, was called as a witness, and all was revealed. And I thought, maybe this is an outlier. Like, surely other people can't be that into this. Like, surely they just think of psychics like I do, which is as just little more than entertainers. And that's when I got this new hunch that maybe the people that seeking out psychics weren't like I thought my sister was, a bit naive, very vulnerable, and grieving and fragile. And actually I think I probably put some value judgments on those people as well. I probably thought they were a bit foolish. Actually, I didn't realize that they could be like Glenn, authoritative, powerful, responsible for millions of dollars and hundreds of staff. And I discovered other chief execs, other financiers, and world leaders, and as I say, the police through a freedom of information request, all taking psychics like extremely seriously. And that's the thing that surprised me the most, just how high up this goes.
Yeah. So when you say you're surprised by how far up it goes, it sounds like we're almost talking about like QAnon or Scientology. And I do wonder the extent to which we should feel like, how should we feel knowing this? Because you talk about, for instance, people like Nancy Reagan, Blanche d'Opage, spouses of political leaders relying on psychics, but also world leaders as well, including quite infamously Adolf Hitler, it turns out. And there's a really fascinating anecdote around there. But also in its role with the legal system, what kind of conclusions do you learn? Because these are high stakes realms, and this is an industry that is not regulated in any sort of way. What did you discover, and how did you feel when you discovered all of this?
I think I spent 2 years in a state of shock, given that I thought that most people thought psychics as, just something to laugh at and entertainment. I think that when you are landed with juggernaut decisions and there's no one but the divine above you, it can be a very uncomfortable place for people to dwell in, even people who have been voted in as the leader of the free world, or they have all of the qualifications and experience. I think that sometimes only the divine is above you when you've got these huge decisions that affect so many people. And I think that it's very, very uncomfortable for anyone, no matter how powerful you are, to dwell in uncertainty. And I think that for some people, their faith isn't enough. Maybe they don't have a faith, or maybe they don't believe in God, or maybe they don't feel like God has answered their prayers. And that's a recurring theme in my book, like the supernatural miracles that people of faith believe in. That a virgin can give birth, and that there's someone in the sky that will answer your prayers, and that someone can come back from the dead. In my mind, as a rational-minded person, a secular person, there is no difference between the supernatural miracles that people of faith believe in and the supernatural miracles that psychics and their believers also subscribe to. But what do we do with people of faith? Well, we give them seats in the House of Lords in Britain, or we did for a long time. We give them tax breaks in this country to run huge influential organizations, and we give them a say over public policy. But with psychics and their believers, like, we deride them and we mock them. I'm not saying that psychics should have a say over legislation in Australia, but I am saying that it's interesting to investigate the relationship between faith and power, and how seriously some of this is taken. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it absolutely does. You mentioned before that, part of this book involved you putting through freedom of information requests. And through it, one of the things that you discover is that in New South Wales, there were at least 19 police investigations over a set period of time, and over a 16-month period, I think, that involved psychics. How do those cases pan out? Because this is the stuff of kind of like popular television, right? When you think of like Medium and Patricia Arquette is brought in, but the fact that it's institutionalized within state police forces, I think would raise eyebrows with a lot of people. How does it work, and how do those cases pan out when you get a psychic attached?
There's a couple of things here. So first of all, I also discovered that the New South Wales Police has paid the expenses of psychic Debbie Malone. And in the book, one of the things that I do is I recruited all my friends that are even like remotely into this stuff to be my psychic investigators. And I send them out to go and get psychic readings too, because what I want to talk to the believer and the skeptic with kind of equal credence in the book. So a lot of the time, my sister would bring me back round going, but a believer would think this, and a believer wouldn't think that was strange, that the police, the believer would think, well, of course they're using psychics. Like, how else are we going to find the missing body? So I'm like, okay, weird, but all right. So I'd come back round to like looking into sending out some of my friends as psychic investigators. And I sent my friend Debbie Malone, who the New South Wales Police Force has paid Debbie Malone's expenses to help on missing person cases. There's a high-ranking Victorian former sergeant who says that every police officer at the top of their game will have in their kit good forensics, DNA, and psychics, and it's the dirty secret of the police, and obviously borne out by my freedom of information request, which I kind of suspected would come back like that, but like. And also it's at least 19 times over those 16 years. It's possibly much, much more just because of the way that they keep their notes. Anyway, but that's just a number, right? So I wanted to dig a bit deeper than that. So the first thing to say is my psychic investigator that went to get a reading from Debbie Malone, she charged $300 and was wholly inaccurate. She got about 20% right and the rest wrong. So, and that particular psychic investigator is a believer, is a big believer. It just doesn't feel like they vibed. So that was interesting in and of itself. Like, this is the police spending public money on pseudoscience. But the other thing is, when Madeleine McCann went missing, 1,000 psychics contacted that family and said, "We know where your daughter is." And they had to hire someone just to deal with them and fend them off. And he told this incredible story about this psychic in Leicester in the UK who phoned the police and said, Madeleine McCann is in a farm in Seville. And based solely on that advice, the police go to Seville, kick down a bunch of doors and ask these farmers where Madeleine McCann is. So suddenly these poor Spanish farmers in Seville are having to explain to their families, like, why is the door missing from our farm door? And the fact that they haven't got a missing girl in their farm. So that in itself was incredible as well. But from digging a bit deeper, I found, Ben, that there are believers in the police just like there are people of faith in the police, and some of them are just believers. So they're going to use this stuff because that's how they conduct their jobs. Sometimes it's, again, that form of imposter syndrome. You're at the top of your game, all the leads have gone cold, you'll do anything to try and help out. Other times the family have been convinced, the family of a missing person has been convinced by a psychic that they know where the body is. Now, if you are the family of a missing child, you will do anything. Like, your desperation would trump your humiliation every time. So of course you're going to go to the police with that kind of information, and the police do sometimes cooperate. And the other reason, which I found was quite interesting, was sometimes psycho murderers wanting to sort of atone for their guilt, or play games and fuck with the police, will pretend to be a psychic and phone
Wow.
up saying, I know where the body is, in order to either mess with their heads if they're a psycho, or to sort of admonish themselves of their guilt if they are feeling any guilt.
It's a huge can of worms, isn't it? Because I take your point that there would be officers who are women and men of faith working in there, but you wouldn't necessarily hear of them inviting a priest into the investigation ranks. And 20%, like if that was a vaccine, that's pretty low efficacy. But it also makes me wonder, say there was a legit psychic who said, here is the evidence, and they find the body in the barrel or under the basement. Does that also compromise that person offering evidence? You know what I mean?
It does. Yeah, totally. Like Debbie Malone's been threatened with arrest several times. Because the police are like, she claims the police are saying to her, like, how do you know this much about the case? If you tell us any more, we're going to arrest you as a person of interest in the case. So she's had to convince them that, like, she's not a murderer a few times. She's released a whole book on this stuff called Clues from Beyond. So yeah, it's spooky.
Some more homework reading. Hey, this is such an interesting deep dive, and your book goes right into the heart of where psychics can be found, whether it's alongside captains of the industry or in legal cases. But then you also go really personal as well, and you zoom into individual cases, and also with yourself and your own family. The other person to whom your book is dedicated is your grandmother. And in the book, you talk about the allure of psychics in grief. You write, only a psychic can give the phony and essential assurances that provide a moment of solid optimism in despair that crucially lifts you to the next moment. And I wonder, what do professionals working with grief, like actual grief counselors, have to say about the value or otherwise of psychics?
Yeah, they surprised me actually, Ben, because I went out to some like trained accredited grief counsellors who, by the way, are the first people you should call if you are experiencing grief, not a psychic. But that's not what people always do. Like what shocked me again is the taboo doesn't always rest at the psychologist's door. Sometimes the taboo, like that they feel there's more of a taboo to go and receive some counselling than there is to go and see a psychic, because I think people are a bit more forgiving when someone is in grief and perhaps has suspended their normal decision making. Grief counsellors said to me that like they gave some caveats. So they said when someone's deep in grief, everyone is the manager of their own grief, and each grief is really personal. And whatever helps them, no matter what it is, as long as they're talking to someone, whether it's a friend, whether it is a medium, and preferably whether it's a trained grief counsellor, as long as they're talking and they're expressing it and they're getting it out, that's the thing that's important. And they all gave some caveats, and they all said, of course, it's preferable that they go and see a grief counsellor. But I really thought that they would turn around to me and say, absolutely not. These are grief vultures. They're taking money and they're purporting to do something that they're not doing. But I think that there are also some believers amongst grief counsellors, right? That's something that you have to consider as well, that they may also believe in this stuff. But also, yeah, I think with my sister, when my sister has seen 10 psychics and mediums in her life, and she went some with repeat visits, and it grew a lot darker after Dad died suddenly in 2015, and she was seeking out mediums, and I grew concerned that they were suspending her in the bargaining or denial stage of grief. And saying, because the whole time Taren was seeing these mediums, my dad wasn't dead. Like, he's here, he's in the room. What do you want to say to him? And and like that felt a bit dark to me. And I was really concerned that they were freeze framing her in one of those stages of grief. But actually, I think she was a stage on from grief than I was, because I was in complete denial. I was going out. My kind of phase of grief was hedonism, so I'd just go out to clubs and dance all night. And I think my sister was a stage on from me. She was at bargaining, and I think I was yet to even get to that stage. And the way that we kind of step into each other's worlds a little bit is that I encourage my sister Taren to go and see a grief counsellor instead of these mediums. and she hires one, and she discovers that moves her through those stages of grief. But the interesting thing about the 5 stages of grief, so there's denial, bargaining, anger, depression, acceptance. The people that came up with that, one of them is there's 2 of them, and one of them's a guy whose son suddenly died in recent years, and he came up with a 6th stage of grief, finding meaning, because acceptance isn't enough. Like grief, it changes you, it lives in you, and this finding meaning, I think sometimes these mediums help people to do that. They almost, when again, it comes back to if you're willing to suspend your disbelief or kind of like indulge this cognitive dissonance where you hold both things to be true even though they contradict each other. And I think for some people they can hear things from those mediums that they don't hear from grief counselors that they really want to hear. And I think some mediums are very clever and they know that's what people want to hear, and they tell them those things. So there's a lot of interesting psychological things going on. So I went into it really against it all, and especially in grief. And I came out with a slightly more nuanced understanding that, if this helps people to talk and it gets people comfortable with being vulnerable and intimate one-on-one with someone, it is a pathway it's like therapy light. It's a pathway to full therapy, especially for those boomers like my mum and my late dad, who outright refused to go to therapy because that was all just a bit American.
Yeah, sure. At the same time, I imagine there's a huge spectrum going on, right? The psychics who probably work within an ethical paradigm of providing what they think people in grief need and giving it to them. And on the other hand, there are scammers and charlatans. And you write about how the ACCC found in 2019 that almost $500,000 was lost on psychic and clairvoyant scams. And of course, that would have only been what was officially reported. I imagine there's a whole other swathe of people who've lost money who would have never reported it out of shame. So what is the line between a psychic, a charlatan, and a scam artist? And how bad can it get?
I mean, there isn't a line. There's no line because it's a Wild West, unregulated industry. So it depends if these people believe in themselves. And from my research and from speaking to the Australian skeptics who follow these people around to RSLs and try and debunk their claims that they are psychics or mediums, they told me that at least 3/4 of these people genuinely believe in themselves and have deluded themselves, were their words. And I thought, that's always more forgivable than deceit, isn't it? Delusion. Like deceit is just sinister. And like you say, outright charlatanism. Whereas those who've deluded themselves and have come to believe in their own abilities, like it's kind of forgivable. But I did explore some of the harm that was also in this world, and there is a lot of darkness. And our biggest stockbroking firm has collapsed. Bodies remain missing. Parents of missing children are told by psychics that they're dead when they're really alive. That's all in the book. And the other thing that's in the book, actually, talking about the ACCC and that 500,000. There's a guy in America called Bob Nygaard, and he is like a psychic investigator, but he investigates psychic fraud, which sounds like a total, like they go hand in hand to a skeptic. A rational-minded person would think, well, all psychics are frauds. But what's happened is quite a few psychics will, in New York City, go up to people looking crestfallen and a bit lost and say, there's something wrong with you. There's a curse on you. You look lost. Come with me. And they say, you've got a curse on you. And in order to remove this curse, you just need to buy me a Rolex watch, and we'll turn back the clock on the Rolex watch, and we'll go back in time and we'll remove that curse. Or in one case, you have to buy me this like $100,000 worth of quartz rock. It was all really weird. And at first I thought, God, who are these insane people that are paying for this stuff? And then I thought, that's really mean of me, because if you are in the depths of depression and nothing's working and you can't get yourself feeling better, and someone spots that in your face, they're really good at reading facial cues and body language, and they give you like a quick fix out of it. Who am I to judge someone that goes, okay, I've got that money, I will do anything to feel better. Everything else is working. And suddenly I felt all this, I think it's about radical empathy and feeling, and this is when it comes back to anti-vaxxers and today, like anti-vaxxers, I think the thing we need to do with them, just the same as believers, is radical empathy, rather than demonize and rather than kind of be scared of them. I think we need to try and hear each other a little bit more, because they've been seduced by this pseudoscience, just like believers, I think, have been. And if we can find out what's led them there, we can have a more rational conversation where we're hearing each other. I wonder if we can just sort of like lead them down to the path of like accredited grief counsellor, vaccination, those kind of things. Because the whole time we demonize them and laugh at them, what do? We push them further into that filter bubble, and we push them further into their stance. And that's when suddenly this book kind of took on a new meaning, when COVID happened and all of this stuff was happening. Because I think misinformation and conspiracy is bad. We can all agree on that. But we're living in this post-truth world where it's really blurry. And, you know, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, we give all this gravitas and credence to people of faith and none of it to other people who believe in other supernatural miracles. So I think that just when I took off my cloak of skepticism and my sister encouraged me to be less dismissive, I started to listen more and I started to hear more, and I grew level of me and my sister and put it on the macro level. We will create more, and this is going to sound utopian, but like we'll create more unity and less polarization if we just listen more and stop. And, you know, I know the memes are funny, and I know it's good to laugh at anti-vaxxers, and I know it's like, you know, of course the most sane and rational route is vaccination. But, you know, let's give them the same credence that anyone else that believes in supernatural miracles, pseudoscience or conspiracy believes in. And let's at least kind of like let them get it out and try and encourage more conversation and less kind of polarization.
Well, in the spirit of listening to each other, Gary, I think we should really start welcoming audience questions in the chat. So if you do have questions, and I'm sure you do, don't be shy, because Gary and I are not. Please start putting your questions in the chat and we'll start harvesting them soon, because we'd really love to hear from you. But before we throw it to the audience, I do have a few more questions, Gary. I mean, I've got a lot, to be honest. But I really want you to tell us about, I think the origin story is that you wrote a story for Vice in 2019 and a version of it makes it into the book. And the Vice article had the very memorable headline of, "I went to a Japanese cult's seance to hear what Margaret Thatcher, thinks of Brexit." Now, this is like beyond the line of like psychic, a charlatan, scammer. This is like the realm of like batshittery now, right? What happened when you went? Who is this Japanese cult? Why were they having a seance? And who was harnessing Margaret Thatcher?
Yeah, it was batshit. Okay, so half the book's set in London, and it's this like balmy night in London. And anyone who's been to London knows them summer nights that like go on till 10 p.m. There's this balmy night, and there's like buzz and cider and possibility in the air, and it was just like brilliant night. And there's this like loud ruckus outside. It's just off Oxford Street, and the cult is called Happy Science, and they have a property just behind Sports Direct where I buy all my clothes, on Oxford Street. And I ascended 5 sets of stairs, and I got to the top, and it was almost like going in a little church, and there was this altar, and there was this Japanese man, and he stood with like a yellow scarf, and then previous to this night, it was a Friday night, this leaflet had been going around saying, we are going to recruit the spirit of Margaret Thatcher to tell us what Britain should do about Brexit. At this point, Brexit hadn't happened. And so then it was really weird. So then like the room was packed. The buzz of Oxford Street just evaporated. This is what happens when you go into this world, and this is what happened when you stop being such a skeptic all the time, right? It's quite dour being a skeptic. Like suddenly everything evaporates, noise goes quiet, and you're just solely focused, and you're so like just really present in the moment, and it's fun, right? So I go in, and then he plays this video of this Japanese man, and it was filmed like 2 years before, so that was really weird in itself, because I thought we'd all be holding hands and we'd be invoking the spirit of Margaret Thatcher. And I had a few things to say to her. I can tell you, Ben, I was going to ask her exactly what she was thinking when she put Section 28 through, the law that made it illegal to promote homosexuality in schools, and I was going to have strict words with her about that. But so I was a bit disappointed I didn't get that chance for a start. That is another book. But anyway, I digress. So he starts saying like, "I am the Iron Lady," and starts pretending to be Margaret Thatcher, this Japanese man, on video. And it's all sorts of weird things happened. She said we should fire and then kill Barack Obama. I don't quite know why. She said that Japan should arm itself for an attack from China, which just coincidentally, as I looked up for Vice afterwards, happens to be some of the political aims of the cult Happy Science, which has branches all around the world. So all sorts of random stuff was said. She never even told us what to do about Brexit. So at the end, the Happy Science PR guy says she thinks Brexit would be a good idea. That was it. So we were like, okay. So then, but the most interesting thing, this was the thing that really struck me. I go down the stairs afterwards, and I'm reporting on it for Vice. And so I thought I'll do some Vox Pops with some of the people who have attended. And I'm interviewing various people, and some of them were like quite giggly and saying, "Oh yeah, that was a laugh, wasn't it?" And something a bit different on a Friday night. And then there was this one guy, and he was dressed in, he was smartly dressed, was wearing a nice shirt, did not shop in Sports Direct. He had brogues on, and he was well-spoken and articulate and pronounced his T's. And he said, "Yes, I thought that was the spirit of Margaret Thatcher. Absolutely, I think that she was brought into the room." And I thought that man could go on a date with you, or he could manage a team of people, or, you know, he could be in a position of responsibility or authority, just like Glenn Rosewall, or just like those police murder investigators. Like, he absolutely believed it was true. And that made me reassess my opinion of believers as flat earthers, anti-vaxxers and climate change skeptics. They're not. That cognitive dissonance lives in a lot of us, and it certainly lived in him.
Gary, that is a wild story. And for the director's cut of that story, everyone should read it in the book. And now is probably a good time to tell everyone that this Zoom session is actually going to become a seance for Margaret Thatcher. So I hope you're all ready for that. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, I want to throw it to the audience soon and their questions. But just before we do, your book's been out for a little while now, and I'm curious as to what the reaction has been. First, from any psychics who might have read it themselves and or believers, so that realm, and also from skeptics as well, because you really engage with people who aren't just offering a skeptical attitude, but they're committed skeptics. They're organized skeptics to the point where they have their own organization. So what's been the reaction from both of those camps?
Oh yeah, the skeptics are organized. Like, they have their own magazine, they have their own podcast. You can win $100,000 in Australia today if you can prove that you have psychic abilities. But they're very proud of that blank check that they carry around, because no one has won it for 30 years. So they dangle it in front of me when I came to meet them. I can tell you, the skeptics hate the book.
What do they hate about it? But you're bringing in the skeptical energy, right? Why would they hate it?
It's not skeptical enough. It's not skeptical enough, Ben. That's wwhy. They hate the book. So they did this review. I'm going to post it to my Facebook when I get around to it. I haven't got around to it yet. But they did this review, and the final paragraph of the review says, this book is half investigative journalism and half a giggly 8-year-old girl excited to go to her first Justin Bieber concert, and in the end, Bieber wins. And
that sounds like praise, right? Surely.
If there's one thing that can make investigative journalism readable, it's being a giggly 8-year-old girl excited about Justin Bieber. So I was like, brilliant.
Also, and Bieber's big, everyone. Bieber's big. What are you trying to say?
I also think, like, you know, my intention at the start of writing this book was to unify believer and skeptic somewhat and find some common ground and look at the nuance and the humanity in this world, because that's why it's called the psychic tests. Each chapter is a different test. It's the most boring question in the world to ask. Is it true? Can they speak to the dead? Can they see into the future? It's like, I'm reading Religion for Atheists by Alan de Botton at the moment, and he says the same thing. The most boring question in the world is, does God exist? Like, we fixate on that, and we don't know. We're not going to know. But there are a whole other bunch of questions and tests that are really interesting. So had the skeptics have reviewed my book and said, this book is brilliant, you should all read it, and we absolutely agree with every word, I would have failed in my intention. So when they sent this very apologetic email to me recently saying, here's our review, it was going to be a page long, it's actually 4 pages long, and we are quite critical. I was like delighted, and may frame some of the paragraphs in it.
That's great. Hey, I am just going to open it up now. Yana, do we have some questions that have come up in the chat? Because if we do, I can't see them yet, admittedly, but are they coming through?
Plenty of questions in the chat. So,
okay, great. Should I hand it back over to you, perhaps?
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Yana.
I'll try to get through as many as we can in the next 10 minutes. But let's just kick it off with Matt. He says, Gary, can you give Ben a tarot card reading right now?
That's a no, because we've got 10 minutes. But I know what Matt is referring to. Spoiler alert, or teaser alert, let's say. I do train up as a tarot card reader in the book. It was super fun, and I do give some readings. I'm not going to give Ben one right now, but maybe later.
We've got another question coming in, both from Fran and Rebecca, and they're asking about an audiobook. Will there be one, and are you going to be the reader? Fingers crossed.
There is an audiobook. There's an actor in the UK right now who's recording it. It was decided that they felt strongly that I didn't have the right voice to record my own book. So no, it won't be me.
That is rude and disappointing. The next question we have is from Dale, and they say, I've never seen a psychic and very much a skeptic, but your book has made me intrigued. What 3 tips would you give to a first timer?
Oh, Dale. Shop around, because some of you, I went to one called Janie in Byron Bay, and she was $30. Debbie Malone was $300. It would have costed my psychic investigator less to have flown to Byron Bay and seen Janie than it would to have seen Debbie Malone. So, you know, shop around. And I'd say every time you go to a new town or city, look them up and see who's around, and have a skeptical head about it, and take it all with a pinch of salt. Don't make any major life decisions on the basis of the reading, and that's something that does happen in the book. So I give a reading to my friend Elvis, which is his real name, and he makes 2 days later he makes a major life decision on the basis of my reading, even though I said to him, take it all with a pinch of salt. I won't tell you what the major life decision is, but it rattled me enough to pack the cards away for a while, and it's partly why I'm not going to give Ben a reading now. So yeah, don't make any major life decisions off the basis of it. And my third and final tip would be, suspend your disbelief, leave your identity as believer or skeptic at the door, and enjoy the hour where you get to explore, where your anxieties are heard and your dreams are nourished and your future ambitions are also listened to. And I think that just enjoy that experience. Although one thing I would say, when I went into, I got sometimes for someone who's an agnostic, borderline atheist, I go into churches at an alarming frequency, and I went into one recently, and before lockdown, obviously, and it said, please pray for others before you pray for yourself, on the pew in front of me. And I thought, that is what this comes down to, isn't it? Because not once did I go to a psychic reading and say, my mate Dale's having a really tough time at the moment. What do the spirits say is in his future? It was all about me. And although that's a really interesting subject, I actually just think when people of faith go into those churches, they are, I have to say, no matter what you think of organised religion, for the most part, they will pray for others, and they are encouraged to do so by signs on the back of pews. And I think that's a really interesting discrepancy.
Good tips. The next question we have is from Ruth. And they say, if people are more likely to engage psychics in times of stress or uncertainty, in your research, have there been times in history or within cultures where there's been a great upsurge in people seeking or seeing psychics?
Yes, World War One and World War Two, to the point where it became illegal, because there was a fear that it would interrupt national morale with so much death around. And again, we're seeing it now. There's a huge upswing at the moment. Really is $1 billion industry, and COVID has made it even more popular with Skype readings, and the crystal ball has become the app like CoStar, and the meme like hashtag not all Geminis. But yeah, in World War One and World War Two, there was such a fear that people purporting to connect you with your dead relatives would affect national morale, that they made it illegal. In fact, to this day, it is still illegal to give psychic readings in South Australia and the Northern Territory. Illegal. Although, unless for the express purpose of entertainment, which is, of course, how they get away with it. But yeah, police who were all male back then, would quite aggressively pursue psychics, to the point where a lot of psychics back in World War One especially banned male clients because they thought that they'd be police trying to snare them. So that is why this is such a female dominated industry, on both the service delivery and on the client side. So on the client side, that's why there's historically been very, very female orientated. On the service delivery side, often it goes back to widows in working class communities who didn't have the education and patriarchy kind of shut them out from making money. So this was a way that they could empower themselves and earn some money on just their guts and their wits, and especially as they got older and they no longer could undertake manual labour. So that's why it's often associated with working classes and women as well, especially.
The next question is from Simone. And they say, how many people that have read your book have said that it's changed their perspective from skeptic to believer, or vice versa?
Good question. I mean, it only came out like 23 days ago, so people are still reading and still considering. Yeah, I did get a lovely message the other day from a friend who said, I've probably been too quick to judge believers, and it's made me reassess that. So I don't know if it's necessarily changing people from believer to skeptic or skeptic to believer. I think what it will possibly do is make those more towards the skeptical end of the belief horseshoe a little bit less dismissive, as I once was, and perhaps a little bit less supercilious towards believers. And I think that's probably the way that it's going to change people. I don't expect this book is going to change a believer into a skeptic or a skeptic into a believer. I think that it's going to be more about, again, it comes back to the humanity, that it's a very human thing to want to be heard and to be reassured and not dwell in uncertainty and know that the future's going to be okay. So I think that really it's going to be more about us hearing each other more than changing our existing belief.
We've got a question from Sky, and they say, if genuine psychic practice, kind of beyond entertainment, were to be regulated, for example, a license needed to set up a business, what do you think this test would be?
Oh, good question, Sky. I did speak to a few psychics saying if there was regulation, like what should it be? And some of them would say things like, you shouldn't be able to come back within 6 months if you've come to us once, so that you don't get hooked. Because there's a chapter where I spoke to people that got addicted to psychic phone lines, and spent thousands of pounds on them. So that was one thing. And another thing they said was that if you have one of the mediums said to me, if you've suffered a bereavement, you should wait at least 3 months until you see a medium, because the grief's just too raw and it's too intense. So there's some sort of like self-regulating ethicism But I did grapple with whether we should regulate this world, because it's wholly unregulated. But there's already a lot of regulation in this country, and in other countries as well. I'm not sure whether regulation is the answer. I just think finding out more. And one of the things that the skeptics do that's really interesting is that they have analytical thinking programs that they run for children. And it's so that they're less likely to be catfished when they go on dating apps. And it's so that they're less likely to become conspiracy theorists and more likely to take vaccines and less likely to spunk all their money on a psychic and make huge life decisions on them. So it's a really, really honourable program that they run, and something that, you leave school knowing exactly how to calculate the area of a trapezium, but not how to deal with grief by osmosis or the breakup of your first romantic relationship. So I think that, and those kind of analytical thinking skills are really honourable that they go around teaching. So I think that rather than regulation, the encouragement of more analytical thinking would probably be a better route, I'd say.
We have time for one more quick question, and it's from Ben, and he says, have any psychics threatened to curse you?
Okay, so I don't think so, but I did wonder if they sent the earthquake yesterday, because I was going on to Studio 10 to lift the lid on their industry, so I was wondering maybe they sent the spirits to send an earthquake so that I wouldn't be able to lift the lid. But the thing I will say, Bob Nygaard, that guy in America that tries to catch psychics who charge money saying, I'll lift the curse on you, really interesting thing happened to him, and I'll finish on this story. So basically, on his very first, he's a retired copper, right, in New York City. And on his very first case, he's got this lump of quartz that sits on his desk that costs like $100,000 from this woman called Megan, who was deeply depressed, and the psychics convinced her that she had a curse and charged her all that money to lift it. Now, he was able to convince the courts that she had been a victim of fraud and extortion, and to win some of that money back. And was successful, and the psychic was actually arrested. The day after her arrest, Bob Nygaard woke up with this massive bung eye, and he couldn't see out of his eye, and it come from nowhere. And he said, I have to admit, I'm like the biggest skeptic you could ever meet, and I was really rattled. And this bung eye lasted for the duration of the court case, and then just went. So make of that what you will. No psychic so far, I don't think, has cursed me, but they seem to have cursed Bob.
Wow. We do have to leave it there because we are going over time. I would love to listen and chat and keep asking more questions, but we will wrap it up. If everyone in the audience does want to find out more, please purchase your copy of the psychic tests. You can buy it at Avid Reader in the link that I've popped in the bio, in the chat, or just buy it from your local independent bookstore if you are in a lockdown city as well. They need all the support that they can get. Benjamin, do you have any final comments?
No, I just can't wait to be out of lockdown. Gary will figure out if we're within our 5 kilometer zone, and we can have like a picnic tarot reading. I'm looking forward to it. Congratulations, Gary.
That is a deal. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. So sorry we couldn't be together in person, but this has been fantastic nonetheless. Thank you so much, Gary. Thanks, Benjamin.
Thanks, Yana.
Thanks, Yana.
Thanks everyone for coming.